interesting that you say it, because we had 5 races in 6 weeks. Then there was a week off. We have Miami. Then there's another week off, and then it's another triple header. So, like, the beginning of this season, it feels very hectic, very just like on fast forward. If you're new to the program, here we go. If you're not, this happens on a weekly basis. Our producers get a little needy, and they like to throw questions at us, and then they make us answer them. I can't actually read verbatim the first producer question because there are naughty words in it.
There's a rude word in there.
There is a word. But the basic idea is, and you've heard us talk about this many times, this is the last year for the current regulations. The rules are changing in 2026. And the big question, Laz, is, okay, what is actually happening with your regulations in 2026?
So at the moment...
That was the clean version of the question, by the way.
And I'll try and keep the answer clean. And actually vaguely interesting, because I know these things can get a bit dull, but essentially the regulations are the same as they ever were. It's just that the closer we get to them, the more people are getting worried that this set of regulations might not actually lead to brilliant racing. And the reason for that is that, as remarkable as it is, they're going to make power units, engines that are 50% powered by sustainable fuel, 50% powered by an electric battery. And over the course of a race, you have to top up that battery. And there's a concern that basically you're asking so much from it and you're not able to top it up enough that you're going to have a lot of racing situations where drivers are lifting and coasting. So taking their foot off the throttle to allow the energy recovery system to recharge a battery to then have the power on the next straight. And circuits like Monza, they've done some simulations, and depending on who you listen to, it's looking like it could create awkward racing, difficult to watch racing, the kind of racing that the drivers are going to moan about. And we know what it's like when the drivers moan after a race and say that was boring because of this and this. It does take the shine off the sport. So there's a concern about that. But how much of that concern, and this is I think the bigger, more interesting question, is linked to the reality of what's going on with these regulations, and how much of it is certain teams realising perhaps they're slightly behind in where they'd like to be with that energy recovery element of the power unit, and therefore they're looking for it to be scaled back. So one of the ideas on the table is that go from, you keep the 50-50 split of how the power unit works in qualifying, but when you get to the race it goes more to 65-35 or 60-40, so that you're not so dependent on the battery power. You can allow the power, the engine bit, to take over a bit. And how that will all play out is fascinating from a political point of view. It's probably not that fascinating to talk about on a podcast, but I think it's very interesting to see who's saying what. Mercedes are saying, well, we've just agreed that we're going to leave it like it is. Why is this coming up now? Red Bull saying, well, we're not pushing in for it, but if you want to do that, maybe we should look into it, because
Red Bull
what if
building
the
their own
racing
engine
isn't?
next year?
Yeah,
so,
for the first time, and
so
it's clear that I think the closer we get to it, the picture is emerging that Mercedes is a long way ahead. And then the other concern is that, what if you have a situation in races where if you've got a Mercedes engine, you can go and win, but if you've got, say, a Red Bull engine or a Ferrari engine or something else, you're incapable of getting into the top 6 just because the power unit isn't up to the job. And then how do you allow teams to equalise that? So that's the conversation that's going on.
And we saw this in 2014, didn't we, where they brought in the V6 turbos. Mercedes were way out in front, and you had Ferrari a significant step behind, Renault all over the place, then Honda came in a year late and were even further behind that. And you had a few seasons where it was kind of locked in, wasn't it? You'd have Mercedes would clearly be in front. Ferrari, it took them a few years to get back to where they needed to be. But you always felt like Mercedes came into every season as kind of the benchmark team to beat. And that's great if you're Mercedes, but a lot of these teams, after a while, especially, some companies coming in with boards and stuff like that, if you're finishing 8th every weekend and that's the maximum performance, not that long before we've seen it with Alpine and Renault recently, you get around the table and you say, well, look, is this worth our money anymore to do this? And Formula One's done such a good job of bringing Audi are coming in, they've obviously got General Motors coming in down the line. You don't want to have a set of regulations where teams feel, well, we started on the back foot, we can't catch up. And that's where this balance of performance thing is quite interesting. I think if you're Mercedes, they talked about it in 2014 and the years after that, didn't they, as well, about trying to kind of scale Mercedes back somehow. And it is difficult, because how do you say to a team that effectively did the best job,
they did their jobs correctly,
we're going to pull you back now and we're going to help these teams catch you up? It's a difficult one to get over the line. I
think the thing, though, is like a BOP, a balance of power, a balance of performance, whatever, that exists in a lot of forms of motorsports. Like if a team is out there running away, in sports car racing, they will put a power cap on them, they will pull them back, and that changes week in and week out. So like that is not like a new concept. But I do think from like a fan perspective, like you want to be excited about new regulations, but the thing that we have gotten over the last couple of years, maybe not 2 years ago, but the last couple of years, when you have other drivers winning races, when it's not just the Max Verstappen show week in and week out, or name the driver, the dominant driver of the time, from a fan perspective, it is so much more enjoyable. And right now, like, Formula One's fandom, the fan experience, it's still been growing, not just here, worldwide. You would hate for Formula One to do something like regulations changes and to have it go in the wrong direction that way.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was just understanding. I understood that the regulations were to make it more eco-friendly, but in order to counterbalance what Laz was saying, from what I've understood, there could be like wing manipulation. The aim is to have like smaller.
That is happening, yeah.
Right?
Now,
And they've had to do that because the ambitious target they've set of 50-50 power units has meant they've had to allow the teams to basically reduce drag on the straights so they don't have too much of the issues.
But then
we're
from a
talking
fan
about.
perspective, I don't want to talk about side pods, guys.
Yeah.
I want to talk about wings.
And this is what's funny about Formula One. I think we just have this constant cycle. You saw it in 2021. There was a slight change, but we had this great season with Lewis and Max. Regulations changed in 22. Red Bull with a dominant team. We're now the year out from another regulation change. You've got McLaren, you've got Red Bull, Mercedes are right there. I think Ferrari will be closer by the end of the year. And it's almost like you keep getting to this position where everyone's caught up with each other, and it's like reset button. And in no other sport would you do that. You wouldn't say, oh, everyone's close now, let's reset this and make sure one team's ahead. And it's frustrating. And I think a lot of teams do say, let's have a regulation cycle that's 10 years long. Or, difficult because technology changes, but I think it's the one thing about Formula One that it kind of shoots itself in the foot a little bit sometimes because, like you say, we're talking about side pods and all this stuff, and you have to kind of to explain what's going on, but it's just not that exciting for a lot of people.
Well, it depends what you want the sport to be. Is it entertainment or is it a technological kind of?
Why can't it be both?
Yeah.
Though?
Well, it can be both, but inevitably, if you want the technological side of it, it has to. It has to evolve. It has to change because otherwise you end up with single make formulas like IndyCar, like Formula 2, and very entertaining. You turn up to race weekends, you genuinely don't know who's going to win. But part of F1's USP, and I think part of the reason why it is considered the pinnacle of motorsport, is because you do have these cars that are being engineered absolutely on the knife edge, and then driven by the very best drivers in the world on a knife edge. And if you start to take some of that away, then I don't think it becomes that much different to IndyCar.
And the guys that are writing the rules to that point are writing the rules from a technology point of view, and that's where they're not sat down being like, right guys, let's come up with a formula that is so fun. And as soon as you start doing that as well, I think you get problems the other way. You start, like, you look at Formula E, they have the fan boost stuff. You start going in a way where it's like, well, we've made this that makes the racing better, but you look at it and you're like,
But then that's manufactured.
Yeah,
that's manufactured
exactly.
racing,
So
and you don't want that either.
So if you go too far the other way, it causes its own problems. So it's a unique issue. You look at like the NFL, you look at football, you look at anything. They don't have to reckon with this idea of technology being such a big part of.
It's like the idea of banning the tush push.